I have spent the past couple of slides talking about different types of protein molecules, and I want to spend this slide beginning to explain what I mean by different, what makes one protein molecule different from the other. And one of the ways to help to explain this is to talk about, to make an analogy and talk about these two words, Serbia and rabies. You may have heard of Serbia, you may have heard of rabies. In case you haven't, Serbia is a country in Eastern Europe. Rabies is a disease that you can get from certain types of infected animals. They're different, obviously. Hopefully everyone will agree that these are different things. Serbia is not the same thing as rabies. Even though they are different from each other, they're made of the same letters. So the word Serbia and the word rabies are actually, they mean different things, even though they're made of the same letters. And that's basically how the English language works. We have 26 different letters, and if we arrange some of the letters in one way, we might get the word Serbia, and it means something to us. And if we arrange those same letters in a different order, we get a different word that has a completely different meaning. That's basically how English works. I want you to think of amino acids as being like letters. We have 26 letters in the English language. We have 20 different amino acids. So you can think of amino acids as each being their own unique letter. And the order that you attach them in other words, if you attach the amino acids in a certain order, will give you a certain type of protein that has a different function than if you attach the amino acids in a completely different order. Then if you attach them in a completely different order, you might make a different type of protein that has a completely different function. In the same way that if you arrange the letters, these letters in this way, you describe a country, and if you arrange the letters in this way, you describe an infectious disease. So that's how I want you to think of proteins and amino acids. Proteins are kind of like words, and amino acids are the order of the letters that make those words. So, and I said in a previous slide that different protein molecules have different jobs. Well, what do I mean by different molecule? How are they different? They differ in the order that the amino acids are attached in. So in this case, if you have the amino acid valine attached to leucine, attached to serine, etc., and you have other amino acids trailing off to the right and to the left, you make a molecule called hemoglobin. If you have these particular amino acids attached in this order, and I'm hiding many of the amino acids because these molecules are very large, but if you attach the amino acids in this order, you will make part of a protein molecule called myosin, and myosin is involved in helping your muscles contract. If you arrange amino acids in this order and attach them in this way, you will help to make a molecule called DNA polymerase, and the job of this particular protein, it's actually a bunch of protein molecules, its job is to copy your genetic material. If you attach the amino acids in this way, you make a different protein molecule called kinesin, which is involved in carrying other molecules around in the cell. So the idea is that it's the order that the amino acids are attached in that ultimately decides what type of protein you make, and ultimately decides what type of job that protein does inside of the cell or outside of the cell. So each kind of protein has a different amino acid sequence, and this just means a different order that the amino acids are attached in. Formally speaking, chemists and biologists will often say that the order of the amino acid or amino acid sequence dictates the function of the protein. In other words, it's the order that the amino acids are attached in that controls what type of job the protein does. And so each type of protein molecule has a specific order of amino acids that are attached in a certain way. The order of the amino acids, the order that the amino acids are attached in, actually makes the protein fold up in 3 dimensions in its own unique way. Now, previously, I have talked about amino acids as being connected to each other to make a protein molecule, and I would make one amino acid attached to another amino acid attached to another one, and on and on and on down in a long chain. And usually I've drawn the amino acids as one long line. That is a little bit of a misrepresentation of how proteins behave. They're almost never just a long straight line. For the most part, each type of protein folds up in 3 dimensions in its own special way. So even though it's made of one long chain of amino acids, the chain actually folds up in 3 dimensions. And so each one folds up in its own different way, and it's the way that it folds up in 3 dimensions that helps to control what type of job that it does for a living organism. So I have a video of one particular type of protein molecule folding up in 3 dimensions. I'll show it to you in a moment. What you are going to see, well, I'll explain what you're going to see in a minute. So in this video, what you are going to see is a cartoon representation of one protein molecule. At first, they're very quickly going to show you all of the atoms and how all of them are attached to each other. And then what they're basically going to do is, that's a little bit too complicated, and they're going to show you the one-letter abbreviation of each amino acid and how each amino acid is connected to each other in this long chain. And the long chain will kind of wind back and forth, but even though it's wound back and forth a little bit, the protein molecule still is not folded up in 3 dimensions properly yet. And they're going to show you eventually how that protein molecule forms. So let's watch it. You don't need to know the name of this particular type of protein molecule, but here it is. It's called GCSF. And here's the atoms all connected to each other. Then they're showing you the one-letter abbreviation of each amino acid. Then they're showing you a little ball representing each individual amino acid. And here's the chain unfolded. And here is the protein molecule about to fold up. And here it is folding up in 3 dimensions. And let's just say that this particular protein molecule folds up in 3 dimensions this way. Then they're going to take away the ball. They're going to show you the one-letter abbreviation. Then they'll show you the atoms again. And then finally what they're going to show you is that there actually isn't this empty space in between the molecules. The atoms take up much more space than you can tell. And here they are filling in the empty space. So this is the protein molecule folded up in 3 dimensions. This is another cartoon representation of a protein molecule. And many of you have probably not seen this type of cartoon representation of a protein molecule before, but this is what scientists typically show when they are trying to show people the 3-dimensional shape of a particular type of protein. This protein is called kinesin. It's one of obviously many different types of protein molecules. This is a molecule that carries other molecules around in the cell. But what I want to show you is that, first of all, chemists and biologists can often spend years trying to figure out the 3-dimensional shape of a particular protein. The reason they are interested in the 3-dimensional shape is that it very often helps you understand what the protein does for a living organism. It doesn't always help, but very often it does. In this case, this doesn't really look like anything that I've shown you so far in this chapter. What the chemists or whoever has figured out the 3-dimensional shape of this protein molecule has done is they've said, look, all of the atoms, if I drew out all of the atoms in 3 dimensions, it's sort of too complicated. So what I'm going to basically show you is the overall route that the chain of amino acids takes in 3 dimensions. And this N here stands for the amino terminus or the N terminus. So this is sort of the tail end of the chain. And they're saying, look, the amino acids start here. They're connected to each other. They go straight up. They kind of flatten out here. Then there's a little bit of a turn. Then there's a little flat area. Some more turns. There's a spiral here. The formal name for a spiral is called a helix. Then there's sort of more turning. And you can follow this around in 3 dimensions. There are helices. There are these spirals. There are flat areas, and then the chain of amino acids sort of bends and turns and eventually ends up in this spiral here, and then you end up at the carboxy terminus, or the head end of the molecule, if you want to think about it that way. And just to show you, even though this is one long chain, the carboxy terminus actually ends up very close to the amino terminus in 3 dimensions. So these things do actually fold up in a very specific 3-dimensional shape. So this is just sort of a cartoon version of the 3D shape of one particular type of molecule that's a little different from the movie that I just showed you. The other thing that I want to emphasize here is that each particular protein needs to fold up in 3 dimensions in a specific way. And if it doesn't fold up properly, it's not going to do its job. It won't do its job properly. And unfolded proteins can actually be quite a big problem for living organisms. So if the kinesin protein molecule doesn't fold up in this way, it won't be able to carry molecules around in the cell. If hemoglobin doesn't fold up in a certain way, then it won't be able to carry oxygen around to different tissues in your body. As far as three-dimensional features of proteins are concerned, there are a couple of points that I want to make. The first is that remember that we talked about how different amino acids can be grouped into different classes. And right now I just want to sort of I want you to think about them as belonging into one of 2 classes. There are amino acids that are hydrophobic, and there are amino acids that are hydrophilic. The hydrophobic amino acids tend to be buried on the interior of protein molecules. And the hydrophilic amino acids, the ones that like water, tend to be found on the surface of protein molecules. Now, I can ask you why. You can pause and think about that. The reason is that your cells, your living tissues, are mostly made of water. So protein molecules are pretty much completely surrounded by water. And if those protein molecules have hydrophobic amino acids, for the most part, those hydrophobic amino acids are going to want to avoid water. And so they will bury themselves they will be found buried on the interior of a protein molecule. And the hydrophilic amino acids, which are perfectly happy interacting with water, will tend to be found on the surface of those protein molecules. So just as an example, these are the 9 relatively hydrophobic amino acids. They tend to be found on the interior of a protein molecule. And I'm emphasizing 10 because that's not always true, but it very often is true. And these are hydrophilic amino acids. They tend to be found on the surface of protein molecules. The same with these. These were also hydrophilic amino acids. Again, they tend to be found on the surface of protein molecules once they've folded up properly in 3 dimensions.